15 men on a dead man's chest. Yo ho ho and a bottle of rum, dry bluff support that we love best. Yo ho ho and a bottle of rum.
Miramar saw that they were shabbily dressed in old homespun frocks and heavy cotton overalls, some of them with punctured straw hats wobbling above their brows. He counted about 30 in all before a wild-eyed peasant woman with a pitchfork, coated in pig droppings, thrust her weapon towards his heart. He parried the blow with his crescent blade, grimaced, and backed toward Nemra. He could kill this woman quickly, but a peasant? He hesitated. The old woman leaned forward, sticking her weather-worn chin out so far that Karamar could see several hairs growing off the end. "Hey, you brazen young girl, what think you now of breaking your love vow?" The old woman dribbled out in a beat-driven regional patois. Karamar doubted instantly that this was any fear of his. Peasants might have often mistrusted him, but he had never felt any fear of them, especially not in the presence of his Barumi blade. He felt his back touch Nemra's, and suddenly he could feel her parrying other peasants behind him. More enemies drifted in behind the old woman, and from all sides. Karamar would have to do something, and quickly. "Kill her, Karamar," Nemra urged from behind him. The old woman gave a nudge on the pitchfork. Her strength grew with Karamar's misgivings. "They're just peasants, Nemra." "No, they're sludge replicas of peasants taken out of our brains. Get slicing." Karamar gritted his teeth while he thrust the old woman back, pitchfork and all, then lunged forward and sliced her across the midsection. She bled out purple sludge from the slash in her frock like a river breaking its dam, until she had melted into a half-formed pile of skin and limbs. Karamar slashed and parried with all his might after that, deftly dodging blows from post hammers, swipes with meat cleavers. One particularly spirited peasant managed to smack his arm with a board and nail before losing his head, but before long, Karamar and Nemra stood within a circle of half-melted bodies, their sandals coated in purple grime. Karamar took a strip of linen out of his pack and tied it around his punctured arm. He looked at Nemra, who was leaned over again, hands on her knees. The blue glow inside her chest flickered like a candle covered with moths. Normally it pulsated gently with the beat of her heart. "Nemra, are you all right?" She didn't answer. "Nemra." She groaned like someone who had been sick to their stomach 15 times. "That one was me," she said. Karamar went to her and pushed up on her shoulders, straightening her. He looked into her angular face and tried to catch her shifting brown eyes with him. She struggled at first, but eventually looked him in the eyes. He had never observed her eyes before, never been allowed to look at them for more than a few seconds as she chided him for burning the beans, or insisted for the 1,000th time that she had no secrets. Now, with her face sheened in sweat and the talisman in her chest beating its light against her like a bird against a cage, her eyes opened before him, deep brown roses, so dark that the iris was barely distinguishable from the pupil. She trembled. "The old woman spoke of a love vow," Karamar said gently. "Stop looking at me like that!" Nemra wrenched herself away from him. "Stop looking!" Nemra froze for a moment with her swords raised. Karamar kept his blade at his side. "I wonder how long you will try to protect that which is destroying you." Nemra bolted ahead, leaving Karamar the difficult task of catching up again. This time, however, he pushed himself to stay with her. The enemies were multiplying with every encounter, and if his assumptions were correct, the next one would be even more dangerous. She would need him by her side, whether she wanted him there or not. Zethmal's pedestal, now stable at the size of a temple pillar, with stairs running up in a spiral up its side, shot out another green missive. It washed over them both. When the light blindness cleared away, a small army stood before them, clad in familiar livery. Lord Rilch, a short, squat man with a ring of salt and pepper hair, stood at the front of a host of 60 armed disciples of Zethmal. Karamar stopped, Nemra beside him.
You want to sit here?
"This sphere is mine," he said. "No, it's mine," she replied. The light in her chest strobed until the flesh above looked entirely translucent, ready to disappear into the next world. Rilch's fur-lined robes, the same hue as the green light emanating from the idol, brushed the ground as he pointed them out to the troops. "There they are, the traitors! They will die for forsaking the idol! Take them in the name of Zethmal!" The disciples, also clad in light green tabards and tunics, raised their spears and let out a mighty roar. They swarmed around Rilch as a river around a rock, and soon Karamar and Nemra faced a solid line of them, their spears outstretched. Rilch remained behind, yelling the same sort of religious zealotry as before. Karamar yelled to Nemra over the shouts of the oncoming soldiers. "Release the talisman! Now!" Nemra held out her swords, but her arms bent a little too much, quivered a little too fiercely. I can't, she said, and Karamar knew from the deathly stretch of her lips over her exposed teeth that she told the truth. Finally, at this late hour, she was telling the truth about something. In the end, with no other choice, they met the spearmen. Karamar dodged 3 of the spears directly in front of him, swinging his arm down with the barumi blade to cut them in half as they passed. Another spear, this one behind him, caught him in the fleshy part of his side. He swung his weapon and cut the spear off at the shaft before its wielder could drive it deeper towards his vital organs. Over and over again, he swung his blade around him in a wide arc, sometimes connecting with weapons and more often connecting with purple spurting flesh. All around him, spearmen melted, but still more pressed in to replace them. Nemra, at first, was lost in the crowd, but then she was beside him, fleeing 3 disciples. The right side of her face ran slick with blood. It looked to Karamar as though her ear had been maimed while ducking a spear. Karamar estimated when Nemra came running to him that they had killed 30 or so of the original 60 spearmen, but still 30 or more pressed towards them as they fought. Karamar slashed through the chest of one spearman, and as the spearman disintegrated, he made a path for them to flee towards the idol. Nemra pointed at Rilch, who still stood perhaps 100 feet from the base of the pedestal, yelling insults. He's the main fear. Maybe if we kill him, the others will disintegrate. Karamar nodded, but his chest did not permit him to bring in a large enough breath to speak a sentence, not while he had to run. The pain in his side turned into a cramp, which caused him to stop for a moment. Nemra stopped, looked back. Karamar waved her on. The spearman swarmed around him, and he forced himself to move his arm, swinging his blade in an unconscious exchange of blow and counterblow. Several of the spearmen collapsed into gelatin under his weapon's edge, but still more crowded in on him. One large disciple in particular gained on him, even as he parried the blows of the others. With a deranged bellow of triumph, he raised his spear and plunged downward. Karamar saved himself for the final blow. Only the squelch of disintegrating ooze accosted him. Rilch's voice left the plain, and so did the sounds of the other soldiers. He opened his flinching eyes to discover the soldiers around him melting into the earth with the same rotten pumpkin swish as the other they had vanquished. Nemra held Dano up over what was left of Rilch's prone body. "We made it!" she called. Karamar limped to where she was, the pain in his side flaring with every step. When he reached her, he pushed her swords aside and caught Nemra up in a tight embrace. She tensed at first, but then relaxed and allowed his chin to sink into her hair. The smell of battle was in that hair, blood and sweat, and the smell of courage. And yet, Karamar thought he understood now what she was hiding. The final lie he had been unable to solve had come undone in Rilch's appearance here. "I don't think that Rilch came here because of either one of us. I think he came here because of both of us." Nemra scowled up at him. "So?" Karamar let her go and walked on in his slow, limping gait towards the pedestal. "So, if Rilch didn't have anything you want, you wouldn't be afraid to disappoint him. All along the journey here, you would have me believe that you only came to the plain for the thrill of battle." She followed him with the posture of a heckler following a condemned criminal. "You still don't know why I want the reward." Karamar grinned. Even his grin grew labored with the wound in his side. "I know your secret, girl. For your sake, I'll keep it to myself."
Where I showed you.
As they closed the rest of the distance to the pedestal, Nemra walked alongside him, fidgeting and twisting, and sometimes opening her mouth to say something to him, but ultimately remaining silent until they reached the first few steps at the base. When she opened her mouth and when she showed her teeth, Karamar saw blue talisman light spilling out. Her chest glowed totally blue now, the talisman casting her ribcage into stark silhouette as though her heart was a pulsating piece of some foreign sun. She held her arm out to Karamar, helping him up each stair, carefully and deliberately. In spite of himself, he felt goosebumps spread up his skin when she touched him with those long, ivory-white hands of hers. Despite the fact that she helped him, her face was taut with emotion. Her shoulders also depicted a tension not derived from clinging to his arm. "If you know what happened to me, you have to tell me," she quavered. Karamar hoisted himself up another painful step. 5 steps from the top, he felt his strength flagging. The world swam around him. He put his other hand on Nemra's arm. "I can't go any further." Her fingers dug into his forearm. "Tell me, then I'll let you rest." "I knew as soon as the old woman mentioned the love vow," Karamar said. "You didn't steal the talisman. You had a lover. He gave it to you as a sign of your betrothal, and you broke faith and left him for fame and fortune." She barked out a laugh, a dry cough almost. "Is that really all you think of me after I saved your life?" Nemra bent her knees and collapsed against the round wall of the pedestal. She slung a hand over one knee and leaned forward. She bore her glowing blue teeth when she talked. "I may have left, but it was he who wronged me. After the betrothal, it was as though he didn't see me anymore. He was lost in his studies and other people outside of our home. 1,000 times my friends would tell me about something he said or did that he never mentioned to me. My love had proved himself incapable of ever loving me. I swallowed the stone with a vow to make enough money to live independently forever, or die trying. I didn't expect you to understand. Karamar watched her, trembling there on the step. The outline of Nemra's jawbone now stood out from the blue glow creeping up her throat. She croaked out one final statement as she got up to finish the steps. But as you said, there are trained wizards who can't release an internalized talisman. Nemra almost crawled up the steps. Her posture stooped and her hands out in front of her as if she would fall at any moment. Karamar called after her. I understand now, Nemra. I'm sorry. But Nemra didn't answer. The idol lay before her, an oval carving of gold depicting Zeph Mal, the monkey god of riches and business. His flipper hands held the likeness of a city-state coin. Nemra put a hand on either side of the statue and lifted it. A disc of pale green light shot out of the pedestal to the margins of the plain. In the wake of that light, the plains writhed with newly awakened life. Karamar suspected the life out there was more like life newly awakened from the dead. The faces were all the same, thin, human, and blonde. A horde of the same man covered the plain, each with a slightly different injury and milky filmed-over eyes. The multiple he wore an apprentice wizard's robe, white alchemist pants, and rural-looking boots. They groaned, they screeched, and all of them hurled themselves headlong at the pillar. Nemra dropped the idol. It rolled across the pedestal top of the hollow plain. Karamar, no, it's him! The undead betrothed, for Karamar was certain now that's what they were, surged up the stairs with unusual speed, knocking each other off of the railless steps in their eagerness to get to the top. Karamar cried out, "Release the talisman! For both of our lives, you have to release it!" One betrothed reached Karamar before the rest. He summoned enough strength to kick it. It lost balance and fell into two or three more undead men crowding toward him. "No, I won't let you hurt him!" Nemra cried to the feet surging up the stairs and to the rest of the plain of undead. It was then that Karamar reached out for Nemra, but Nemra wasn't there anymore. Her eyes were gone, and in their place was the piercing blue glow of the talisman. For a moment she stood there as though she were only standing because a fine piece of thread held her up from the tip of her head. That moment ended when she thrust her arms out to the sides and her chin to the sky. Her chest heaved, expanded, heaved again. Finally she coughed, and that cough became a roar, and blue fire surged out of her mouth and into the purple malaise of the sky. The swirling masses were there, froze in their turnings, turning gray in a wave rippling out from where Nemra's flame had pierced them. Another undead betrothed staggered towards Karamar, swinging its clawed hands in his direction. In an instant, its chest was pierced through by what Karamar at first thought was a ray of light from the sky. As the man disintegrated before him, Karamar saw that it was actually a coal, about the size of his fist, flaming in bright blue. More coals rained down from the heavens, striking the undead minions of the plain of Zeph Mal with deadly accuracy. From the pedestal to the outer reaches of the plain, where they had entered, the men collapsed and pooled together in a sea of sludge. Karamar pulled himself up and the remaining few stairs to the top of the pedestal. There, as the flaming hail petered out as naturally as a real rainstorm, he crawled over to Nemra. She lay on her side, breathing slowly in and out. Karamar watched the swell of her bosom, free of the sickly blue glow, and longed to touch her. Lying there on the black stone, she breathed deeper and easier than Karamar had ever seen her do. She was softer now somehow, freer. Her eyes opened as Karamar leaned over her, the black ropes of his hair touching her sweet skin. Her lips parted and she whispered, "I think I may love yet."
Well done.
This reading brought to you by the works of Stephen B. Pearl. Available in fine bookstores everywhere or by order from Amazon.